And then Art wrote a column called The Voyager, and then there was a Racer's Edge column, and Ask Dr. Bike, which was kind of funny. It was like Dear Abby, but Ask Dr. Bike. And then minutes were taken, and so we probably had about 10, 15 people at that time. But an interesting fact is the first year, membership doubled and then tripled. It was word of mouth, and we all didn't have any idea. There were so many people who wanted to get out on their bikes, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. So we had touring for families, and we had some hot dogs that wanted to race, and we had everything, and it was great. And the cost of the newsletters, by the way, was partially funded by Mark's Bike Shop and Back Alley Bikes. And Mark Nisley, by the way, of Mark's Bike Shop, was the first elected president of, and I think he got a lot of this going, if I remember. Oops. All right, Mark's in that picture, I think, somewhere. And I'm in there, and Ray Ritchie and Norm Gillickson, and anyway, so we were off and running, and I think we had a nice little group of people there gathered. And I guess it was by word of mouth. Anybody that liked to ride a bike was welcome to join the club. And we had meetings. The first meetings were at the Harrisonburg National Guard Armory, which I don't even know is there anymore. Is it?
Yeah.
And I live in the country, you know. I don't really know. But and then the Wellness Center, the Valley Wellness Center, hosted our meetings for a long, long time. So that's how we got started. And we had rides planned, and we all went out on rides, and it was just a lot of fun. So my next pictures are, these are the Super Bowl Sunday rides, which still go on, I think. Thomas, do they still go on?
They still happen.
They still happen.
Still happen.
Well, by George, here was the first group of people that ever did that. And that was us in 1986. There's Ed Gaynor, who then owned Back Alley Bikes, myself, and Al Clay, who's sitting back here, and who's still quite an athlete. And here's Les Wells. She's down here on the end, eating a candy bar as usual. So that was the first. And I, like an idiot, did not write nobody stood around with a camera in those days. Oh, nobody had a camera. One or two people might have a camera, big old box camera of some sort. So we're lucky to get a few shots, and I think this was the next year or the next year. There's some JMU kids here. There are some bike shop people that work. There's some people who later went on to racing, and just a bunch of my friends. And the reason I have all this, and I guess I am recognized, in some way for starting these things, is because I think it was my idea. If you're going to watch the Super Bowl, you might as well do some exercise before. So this was a group one year. Of course, there's snow on the ground. A lot of times, this is up at, we're on the way to Reddish Knob. There's a big parking pull-off before you start the steep up to the last part to get to Reddish Knob. This is where we always met. Some people rode from town. Some people rode from the bottom of the hill. And some people saved it for the ride. I saved it for the ride. Anyway, here we are. Here's maybe the next year. I don't know. Les in his old van, and here Marcia's in there. Marcia was on every one of those early rides. Some people that later on owned Back Alley Bikes. And then here's the next year.
I don't know.
Got bigger and bigger. These were a lot of JMU kids who formed a bike a racing team, which I think Les will talk about a little bit. And just friends of friends and whoever wanted to come. So we had a great little group, and here's another year. We had a great little group, a lot of snow up there. Snow was always a lot of fun. I don't know, that was the most fun, snow. Everybody some people who later went on to go pro in men's cycling were with us. Here we are again. I was such a hot dog. It was always me in the front there. Because my friend was taking the picture. My friend Joelle was taking the picture, so she wanted to say, "Sue, get out in the front." Anyway, there we are. Nicholas' dog Dharma, who tried to keep up. And, this is outside of my house in South Harrisonburg. That we always, every Sunday morning, whether it was Super Sunday or not, a group of us would meet and we'd go up on the mountain and ride mountain bikes. Mountain bikes was a big deal then. So this is a group just one Sunday morning. I don't know, which Sunday morning that was, but.
To Les.
Yeah.
Your turn, Les.
That's about it. Good. Okay. Thank
Throw
you.
Les the microphone.
Oh, this is it. I don't know.
You didn't need
Just the mic.
He needs to
My name is Les Welch, and my family moved to Harrisonburg in 1970.
Oh, by the way, Sue used up half your time.
I can't tell what time it is.
I was 3 weeks shy of turning 16. My family moved here from the Washington, D.C. suburbs. My parents had met working at Fort Belvoir, and they ended up getting the same type of work at Madison College. So I had 4 brothers. We found a big house and we moved to Harrisonburg. And it was interesting to me because the thing about turning 16 was that you had to go that day and get your driving license. But being in Harrisonburg, I found that there was really no need for a car. That it was a small town, much smaller than it is today. And I ended up postponing my driving license for a number of years as a result. I went to Harrisonburg High School and finished in '72. And I had a great opportunity to really improve my cycling when my bike that moved with me from the DC area got stolen. And I went out to Mr. Edgar L. Huffman's. He had a little home bicycle business in the Ashby Heights neighborhood on Westmoreland Drive. And it was, to me, a really monumental thing to climb up the hill, Court Road, headed east, and go to see Mr. Huffman. He was an old fellow, and he couldn't see very good in one eye, and he wheezed real bad. He was probably 70s, mid-70s, perhaps older. He was the bicycle business in Harrisonburg in that time. Very, very nice man. And he made my first 10-speed bike for me. That got me into riding greater distances and enjoying more and more riding. And as a result, when I finished high school, I started doing bicycle repair. I was a home service person and then ended up opening a shop. The original shop was 161 South Main Street. It was actually in the bottom of the wine building, which was owned by Martin Palmer. And he owned a couple businesses, including the Palmer House Restaurant and Martin's Garage, which was kind of a beer and dancing place for younger people. And the current use of that building is now part of the Clementine and Ruby's area part of town. So the building is still there. It's been a long time since it was a bicycle shop. That same year that I opened the shop, Back Alley Bikes, in '73, is when other bike shops around the valley started opening up. A college student in Bridgewater, Eddie Warner, opened up Warner Bicycle Company in Bridgewater, and then had some friends open an annex in Harrisonburg on Elizabeth Street next to the old firehouse. There was a third bike shop in town that was opened by some EMU students or graduates, and it was called Spokes and Company, I believe was the name. And some of the Moss brothers owned that business. And it was a great time. Cycling was a super popular sport. The president's Surgeon General had recommended cycling as a way to exercise healthily, and we had a real big bike boom. It was hard to get bicycle parts. It was hard to get bicycles. We did a lot more repair then because the supply of bikes was actually quite tied up. And there was Again, a nice move with some of the local riders, including Dave, who had started the local bicycle club, and there were growth seen in all sorts of segments of cycling. The bike was used for fundraising, different events were set up, as well as there was a bicycle race at Bridgewater College. So we were still, you know, a small spot on the map of cycling, but we were growing rapidly. In a couple of years, the shops I mentioned were all gone. Back Alley Bikes continued to be open under different ownership. I left the area. One of the mechanics at the Spokes & Company bike shop, Mark Nisley, opened Mark's Bike Shop. And over the years, we had a number of shops come and go. The other thing that I was going to talk about besides the early days of bike shops in Harrisonburg was a bit about JMU cycling. And it was my good fortune in the late 80s to be working with the East Coast Bicycle Academy. I was the instructor at that time. And that was a branch of Cool Breeze Cyclery. Cool Breeze Cyclery ended up being a new shop that opened in the same building as Back Alley Bikes on South Liberty Street, just south of the Route 33. And Cool Breeze ended up sponsoring one of the early JMU cycling teams in the late 80s, 87, 88 era. JMU had a real powerhouse of cyclists, including a number of people that Sue mentioned, a number of riders who turned professional, a number of the people in the bike club at JMU ended up staying in the bike industry. So we have a strong relationship with the past through the current bike industry and the people who got involved at that point and stayed involved. I will say that we ended up over the years starting a triathlon club at JMU, which was also sponsored by local bike shops. And of course, I know the cycling clubs and triathlon club are still active here on campus, so I'm going to say that's my section of the history.
Okay. Well, pass the mic back down here, and I need the clicker. I'm Art Fovarg, and I say let's talk about the Shenandoah Valley Century, because that's what I know about. We've had 36 of them, as you can see there. There's a collage of posters and other paraphernalia from the first 30 years, and it's the longest continuous running century in the state of Virginia. Maybe the world, but at least the state of Virginia. We know that. It got its start at the June 1983 meeting of the new Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Club, when someone, no names to be mentioned, raised their hand and said, hey, are you guys going to do a century like so many other bike clubs do in the traditional century month, September? And so that September 1973, we had our first century. Had 35 people there. It cost you $4 and held it at the National Guard Armory. And for an extra $1, you could sleep on the floor of the armory the night before, so you wouldn't have to drive there that morning. The design of the century, and a century is 100 miles, bicycle 100 miles, if there's someone here that doesn't know that. The design was fairly unique. It was in the shape roughly of a 4-leaf clover, 4 25-mile loops. The start and finish in Harrisonburg, and the checkpoint where all the loops would join would be was in Bridgewater. Actually, we stole the design from the Kaleidoscope Century in Lynchburg, but we'll never admit to that. The second year also started at the Armory. We had 7 years start at Westover Park, and then it was at Hillendale Park ever since then. So a few highlights over the years. Our 10th annual century, we had commemorative t-shirts. Looks something like this. It was also the emblem for this show today. And we also had a participation award, which was given to the person who'd ridden the most centuries to that point. There's Sarah then Miller, one of our great volunteers, presenting it to Gary from Lynchburg. He'd ridden 9 of the 10th centuries, and I know he rode 20 of the next 21, and then a few more after that. So 1996, the remnants of Hurricane Fran washed through the valley, and 2 days before the century, and so the day before we went out checked out the roads, and a number of them were covered with water, and there was other issues. So we officially canceled it, but all the arrows were painted, the bananas were bought, the volunteers were ready. Some people rode parts of it, so we officially counted. That's why the asterisk was on the first slide there. The next year, the 15th annual century, again, we had commemorative t-shirts. Looks something like that. Let's see, the year 2000, it was starting in Hillendale Park, and like every year, we'd go down at the anointed time, 6 o'clock, because that's when the gate was supposed to be open. But it wasn't open that year, and we waited a little bit, waited a little bit, waited a little bit. And so somebody, no names to be mentioned, got their toolkit out and kind of dismantled the gate until we could get into the park. And if you ever go look at the gates on the hill, city parks now, you'll see the more welded construction than they used to for some reason. Up until 2005, the treats at the finish were typically baked goods of some variety or another, often donated by club members. But in 2005, we introduced the paninis, which have been a big hit. And if we ever get rid of the paninis, there'll probably be some, revolts, and we'll have to end the century. By the time of the 25th annual century, the individual cost had gone up to about $10. But to celebrate a quarter century of centuries, we lowered the price to $4. Okay? Had this shirt for volunteers. Had these commemorative water bottles which we gave away, sponsored by local bike shops. And there was other goodies too, door prizes and some other things. Come the 30th annual century, we had these commemorative socks available, designed by Branch Crockett, may he rest in peace. These are fantastic, big hit. And that pretty much wraps up the century and everything. And I just want to mention a few other things here. Let's see. There we are, AgVit. There's been a lot of other cycling events in the valley, some sponsored by Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Club, Mountain Bike Club, Coalition, and some not. But two of the older ones I wanted to mention were AgVit, the mother of all acronyms, Annual Great Valley Interstate Tour from Harrisonburg to Harrisburg. Started in 1982, sponsored by the Daily News Record. Of course, this is before there was a club. And then the next year, it went from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to Harrisonburg. So they didn't have to change the acronym. And it went back and forth every year. There was at least 6 of them. Maybe there was a 7th one, I'm not sure. Here's the start at Courthouse Square for the 5th one. You can see it was going to be a kind of a drizzly day at the start, the way people are dressed. And then the other rides were the Shenandoah Valley Tours, which were created by the regional chapter in Harrisonburg of the American Lung Association to promote their big fundraising ride later in the year. And they had these rides from about 1987 to 1982. And in 1987, I think also 88, they partnered with Pizza Hut. And so you would go to these rides, you would get a Pizza Hut t-shirt, looking like this. You could do either a shorter family type ride, maybe 10 miles, or a longer ride, 20, 25 miles. And then you go back and you stuff your face with pizza. And they were always a lot of fun. And then the last thing I want to mention is bicycle plans. In 1991, November, a group of Harrisonburg and county personnel got together with some people from JMU, some SVBC members, and some other cycling enthusiasts, and started working on the Harrisonburg City and Rockingham County bicycle plan. They completed it in 1994. In July 1994, the City Council, Harrisonburg, adopted the plan with some minor revisions. Sadly, later that year, or maybe it was early 95, Board of Supervisors, Rockingham County, did not approve it. But, that was the first plan for Harrisonburg, and there's been a number of revisions since, with a lot of SVBC members putting a lot of efforts towards it. And then was it last year or 2 years ago, Rockingham County finally adopted a plan, and so they're with it. And my comment then was, could have done it for free 20 years ago, because I think they paid a consultant to do it. So that's all I got. Marcia, here.
I don't know, I can just talk. All right, in case no one knows who I am, I am, let me see, I'm the social director. I'm all about social riding. When they asked me to mention history, first thing that came to mind is I lead a Wednesday social ride. I've been doing it for 27 years. We've met at various places. When it started, I worked at a bank downtown, so we started from a parking lot downtown. Then I moved to Harrisonburg High School, the old Harrisonburg High School, so we started meeting there. And then we moved to the new high school, so now we meet out there. For those of you who have ever heard anything about it, I hope the word is social, calm, consistent.
On time?
And we leave at 5:15. 5:15.
5:16.
No, we leave. I think the key to it being going on for so long is the fact that we are consistent. People know we're there. I have visitors who have come into the valley years, and I won't see them for years, and they come back and we're there. They know we're going to be there. So anyway, I have a lot of fun doing it. Another secret to the success is I don't tell anyone where we're going. It's a group ride. It's meant to be a group ride. If you tell people where you're going, they just take off. Another one of the rides that
And what do you do to people that take off?
we drop them.
Go a different direction.
I deliberately turned, even if I wasn't going to, I turned. So I just dropped them. It's easy enough. They learn. Another one of the rides that I'm semi-famous for is the icicle ride that we do every year on January 1st. We've been doing it for, I think I ticked it off at 24 years. We've been doing the icicle ride. Again, we started doing it in Harrisonburg, and we did Hillendale Park. And then one of the organizers moved to Bridgewater, so we moved it to Bridgewater. So we're flexible, we can. And we've gone from temperatures of 17 degrees to 60 degrees. So when we have 60 degrees, we have 60 people show up. When we were 17, we actually had 17 people show up. So that was amazing.
It's a rule.
Yeah, it's gotta go with the town. The other ride I wanted to mention that I've been leading for some time, and Kate mentioned it, is the women's ride. I lead a women's ride on Tuesday nights. And again, super social, all about calm, all about having fun. We're not out there to go fast, we're just having fun. And I love introducing people to the roads and the routes in this area. And that's my passion. I love cycling, and I love leading rides. And the only other event that I wanted to mention too is that in terms of history, back in 1992, the Chamber of Commerce asked the Shenandoah Valley Bike Club if we'd be interested in doing a 3-day cycling event in Harrisonburg, and got the whole ball. They sponsored it, they helped us organize it. All we had to provide were ride leaders and routes. And so I became involved with that and have stayed involved with it for years. It no longer is a chamber event, and it's no longer a coalition event, but we did have the beginnings of it. The proceeds that we made from it eventually started going to OCP, our community place, and eventually they took the event over as well, and they no longer have it, but it was a great fundraiser for them. So I guess his part of history with the Bike Coalition is ride leader, socializing, and I would call myself a forever volunteer.
She's also the treasurer, isn't she?
Keep her the money. Good. That's it.
Guess you're next.
I am Michael Newpower, generally known as Noops. Some people did not know my real name for 20 years, I think. Anyway, I moved to Harrisonburg in 1989, and one of the first people I contacted Was Miss Marcia here because she was in the bike club? I was a rider. I want to know what was going on. She got me involved, and I think she got me into being the vice president in 1990. And a year or two after that, all of a sudden, I was the president. And I was the president for about 13 years, I believe. So I'm going to talk about a boring subject, probably more the newsletter and just a little bit of the evolution of it. So of course you've seen the first one, and as Sue mentioned, if you look at the top there, Ask Dr. Bike, just some of the articles that we've had throughout the years and how the newsletter has evolved. And again, we just like Dear Abby and what's going on and how do I do this and whatnot.
Oh, check out the questions to Dr. White. Submitted on a 3x5 card and left at the Turkey Monument on Route 11 South. Dr. White will retrieve the card.
For historical purposes, that was written by John Phillips, who's no longer around here.
Okay. All right. And just, you know, we went from a solid piece of solid sheet, then we went to comms, we're back to solids. Went to more things here where we have racing, as Sue said, there's a racing news about skinny tires. So we've gone through a whole lot of things in the club. Racing wasn't a big part when I got here, but we still held time trials and whatnot. So here are tips for riders at the top. That was always nice to put some tips in for people, especially those who were new and just wanted to get a little bit more information, maybe felt bad about asking somebody directly. We put in the newsletter. Here's another variation of the newsletter as we got into the 1990s. And then it started getting to this format. Greg Gum there, I think, is up there as the newsletter editor. And that's 1991. And then it started getting, there's Greg's name there. He had the newsletter, I think, a year or two. And after that, I ended up being the newsletter as well. And again, that was probably about 13 years that I ran the newsletter. The tips we used to have, we are affiliated with the Adventure Cycling Association and the League of American Bicyclists. Adventure Cycling does a lot of touring, sets up routes throughout the country. I'm actually going cross country with one of their tours this year. I've been on 2 other tours with them. League of American Bicyclists is very advocacy oriented, and they started putting out these EC, which is effective cycling notebooks, because they have effective cycling classes. Carl's been through that. Haven't you? Aren't you an effective cyclist?
It's the league.
Yeah.
Adventure cycling instructor, certified.
Yeah, certified. Okay. Well, this is some of the things that go through, and instead of just tips from somebody who just wrote up a few things, they actually put out whole sheets, and I would copy it. Whatever would make my job easier as a newsletter editor, I would do. So I just say, hey, they did a whole page for me. I'll put it in there just as it is. And then it started getting different formats. I started learning Word a little bit better, so I started messing around and making 3 columns and whatnot.
Marcia's still the treasurer.
Yeah, Marcia's still the treasurer. One thing I wanted to point out here in 2000, and actually, this one, in 1996, we had a new vice president. That was after I had said I had too much going on. I was going to MBA class here at JMU. I had bought a house. I said I can't be the president anymore. And David took over, but then we ended up with no vice president. In 2000, we had, if you see up there, no president. Keep in mind, I was still doing the newsletter though. So things were still moving along. It was just that we didn't have actually a president. 2003, we had no president and no vice president. But Marcia was still the treasurer. That's right. And Marshall here was there as secretary.
You talk about complete control of a club.
Yeah.
Marcia and Marshall. They couldn't do anything without us.
Yeah. So 2007, we're getting closer to the time where the two clubs, the mountain bike club merged, but this was one of the last actual bike club newsletters that we had before things merged. And the last thing I really want to bring up is near the bottom, the second last item there, is the 8th annual ice cream ride. I started that. And I will tell you, just like the Pizza Hut rides, I led one of those rides, and I actually think that was supposed to be warm-up rides for some kind of fundraising, lung association or something or other. I led that because there was pizza, and I was single, so, they had pizza. I actually started the ice cream ride because I said it's going to be hot, it's going to be August, and I thought it's not going to be a lot of people. Maybe the club would pay for ice cream if I let a ride. So I started leading a ride in 1991, and that's how the annual ice cream ride came about. And that's 28 years have gone by so far.
And we're still
With-
paying for
We're
this.
We're still paying for Newt's food.
That's right. I was always the last one at the Century saying, what do you have left over? I'll take all the muffins and bananas and whatnot that you don't want. So, that's it for me.
Go back
Go back
to,
to,
who you got?
and Marshall's up.
That's, Jack Leatham is, Thomas's
Nephew.
nephew. Yeah.
The youngest, obviously.
The youngest,
Yeah.
he was 12.
Maybe, yeah.
He couldn't vote, he couldn't drive, so he became the vice president.
The closest I'll ever get to the vice president.
And he's now,
Married, 26, 27 years old. Yeah,
still in the
military.
military. Yeah. I'm Marshall Hammond. I'm next connected to her. Let me ask you a question. You can take some of my 3 minutes. Discuss real quickly the Century logo and describe how it got started.
Century logo.
You mean the marking?
The marking.
Oh, Dan Henry.
The Dan Henry.
Here.
Oh.
This is great.
So, it's a circle with a line through it. Sometimes they're real nice and neat. Other times they're like that. And it's just, they're painted on the road to tell people where to go when they're riding and everything. And so you'll have a big intersection, and so as you're riding along and everything, you might have an arrow here, and then an arrow there, and then one over there, so you know you went the right direction. How long do you want me to go?
And how did they get the name Dan Henry?
Because there was a guy named Dan Henry that invented them. Took out patent on them, and
Wasn't he
from
a
New
caver?
Jersey.
Didn't he cave?
I don't know.
Spelunk. Cave in Spelunk.
Wasn't he a spelunker that
And that's
needed a
where
more?
he learned it, and so he started marking caves.
I just have that in my head.
Anyway, there was a big article a number of years ago where he passed, I think in one of the cycling magazines.
That's your
I remember seeing that big thing about Dan Henry's passed, and we thought, oh my God, we can't use his signs anymore. I'm Marshall Hammond. I was secretary when Ben Wise was president and our 12-year-old vice president. Of course, Marshall was still keeping the book. It wasn't as automated then, and Kyle wasn't messing her up on a monthly basis by sending his unknown expenses to us. But I want to talk about the transition from the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Club towards this Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition, because it's going to tie into Thomas and the Shenandoah Mountain Bike Club. As you can see through the newsletters and the discussions and the number of people up and down and kind of vacillating back and forth, there came hard times when we could actually gather together enough people to keep some of the events going. One of the events was the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Festival that left in Bridgewater. We took over. It was a Friday afternoon, Saturday and Sunday, multiple rides, Saturdays and Sundays. But we got down to the point where we really couldn't man all the rides and the rest stops and everything like that. And that's how we tried to get, or started to get the OCP involved, and they were providing rest stop support and SAG support. That's another story, but we won't go there. But then we turned it up completely over to them, and it lasted for a number of years, I guess, before they decided that it wasn't something that their organization fit into. But anyway, our meetings ended up in the back room of Luigi's. If you know where the current pizza place is, I don't even know the name of it.
Three brothers.
Brothers, okay. We ended up in the back room of Luigi's Pizza, usually at a table of 6 to 8, very seldom more than that. And in order to entice people to come, in fact, in order to get Newts to come, we started buying pizza. He wouldn't eat pizza, but he'd come and give us $1.25 for a Sprite. So, but anyway, eventually we got to the point where, and I'll give due where it's due. Mr. Ben Wise sat down with all of us one day and said, you know, we're really not fulfilling any mission besides buying pizza and drinking beer. We need to do something better than this, and we can. We have a lot of people. We have a good organization. It needs to get brought together, and we need to have a goal and a mission. And I will honestly say that it was that, I don't want to say tongue lashing, because Ben will never tongue lash anybody, but I'll say that it was a wake-up call for all of the ones that were somewhat active in the bike club and said, yeah, you know, you're really right. We shouldn't just be buying pizza and drinking beer. We really need to be doing something with this. And it went from that discussion, a minute, and you got tongue lashed too about starting a mountain bike.
I did get a tongue lash.
Yeah, okay, well, anyway, but not from Ben, no, this is from somewhere else. So then the Shenandoah Mountain Bike Club, and all of a sudden, it just seemed to be a wonderful meld to bring the two together. The enthusiasm of the mountain biking group, the patience and endurance of the road bike group, and we started bringing it together. I will say, I think, Kyle, you were still going to school, weren't you, when we were doing this?
In 2007, I was finished.
Yeah. I will say that at our initial organizational meetings, and it was at Plesto, in one of the rooms, the law was laid down. It was not a tongue lashing, it was just a statement. The new organization will have the same initials as the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Club. And it happened. It became the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition. So we didn't have to change any of our t-shirts.
All right, hello. Thomas Jenkins, happy to be here. I have to thank you all. I don't think I would be here unless there was the Super Bowl Sunday ride and the Century and everything else. So thank you guys for all the work you guys have done. I thought the best place for me to kind of go back to was the early days of the Mountain Bike Club and kind of some of the things that were happening before we made it the Shenandoah Mountain Bike Club. Some of the early events, one of the first ones was what was called Dollar Downhill, which became, some people know now as Six Pack Downhills, which this shirt was one of the early, and I think it has the trails on the back, maybe?
Off-road fixed-gear University Championships.
Oh yeah, there was that too.
It's got beer.
Right. So, in the early 90s, yeah, mountain bikes were the hot thing, and I was relatively new to Harrisonburg, and Chris Scott, who a lot of you know, we grew up together since we were about as tall as this table, and he was trying to think, well, how do we get JMU students out to mountain bike? So we're like, made some flyers. She's like, let's do $1 down. Everyone throws $1. We'll see who makes it down the trail the fastest. So we did that at the western slopes of Massanutten down the Honeycomb Trail, which is also called the Hole in the Guardrail, because that's where the hole was. So that early first mountain bike kind of organized event that I know of was the $1 downhill. We started doing it. It was fun. We did it once. Let's do it again. Started doing it on a weekly basis. People got upset because the same people kept getting the dollars. Even though all the money went to usually the back room of Luigi's Pizza and Beer Fund. So we're like, okay, we'll change it up. Everyone bring a 6-pack. Throw it in a cooler. Person has to have everyone at their house afterwards. No one complained about that. They're spending more money, but they thought it was worthy. So that was one of the early events that got the mountain bike group going. And as we used the trails, we started realizing, hey, we have to maintain them. So we started maintaining the mountain bike trails. And a lot of the exploration was happening, so the trails were, you had to kind of dig them out. Like, I think there's a trail in here. Oh, there's a yellow diamond, there's a yellow diamond. And you had to piece those yellow diamonds together. So we wanted to put a name to this group of people. So we said, let's start a mountain bike club. And we were kind of, honestly, oblivious to the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Club. You know, we just thinking, we had our blinders on, we were running fast, we were doing everything fast. And it was just like, let's go. So we started the Shenandoah Mountain Bike Club. And as Marshall said, at the time I was working at Blue Ridge Cycle Works, and myself and some others had created a little information flyer about Mountain Bike Club. And the guy comes in and says, why are you starting a mountain bike club? It's like, because we want to do good things and have peace on earth. And he's like, there's a bike club already. I'm like, well, we've already kind of started this. And I believe that was Mark Stecker at the time. So that was in probably around 96, we started the Shenandoah Mountain Bike Club. And that's, you get the club going, you get more people, you get more creative ideas. So that's 96 to 97. If you look back at the history, it was a starting year for a bunch of events. The Tour de Berg started then. We started, gosh, I'm trying to think what else started. The Tour de Berg was going on. And we got the mountain bike club going. And we started doing a lot of the similar things. We got the president going, we had group meetings. And then we started also doing a lot more at Massanutten, which was now a staple with our riding scene here. And that was an important piece in trying to get, once again, a name going with all the efforts. I think it was, I'm trying to remember when we got going with the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition, the bike club, but I started attending the bike club meetings. And then
We started, went into the regional library, and we have a big meeting.
We
open
did have a big meeting with the wilderness groups, was one of the things. And then we also had, there was a group of people who wanted to do a lot of bicycle advocacy. And they were like, let's start another group. And we started scratching our head early 2000s. Let's start a third group. That's another group, the meetings we all have to attend. So that's when we kind of said, can we possibly pull together multiple organizations and have an umbrella organization, the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition as we know it now? And it was not a quick process. It was a slow process, a very thought out process. Because a lot of people had resistance against it.
We didn't want you dirty mountain bike.
No, we didn't. But we were able, I think, to do it and bring together what was this energy of that early 90s, kind of late 90s mountain bike scene, which was super active, and then jump on to what was kind of a fading organization. And I think all of a sudden bring in this advocacy, another arm, and brought it together, and I think formed what is probably one of the more active bike groups, for any community, more or less a community of this size. But it was pretty exciting. I think from the mountain bike club, I don't think that energy would have happened unless it was kind of done on its own. It was a great spirit in that early, mid-90s. A lot of people, as I mentioned, Chris Scott. I see Lindsay back there. Where's your father, Mike Carpenter? I think it was your first birthday party that we dreamed of the six-pack invitational. Yeah, I think you might have heard that story.
So you were there, Lindsay.
Right, she's been there all
You
along.
were the first six-pack.
But yeah, it was that early mountain bike energy, and then turning the mountain bike club into a nonprofit, so we could go after trail grants, and then combine that. And so, super proud to be part of it, and super proud of everyone who's done their work here, and kind of made Harrisonburg, 40 years of rich cycling history.
Good job.
I think we're all grateful for it.
Everybody.
I think we got 2 minutes left for questions.
Or as long as they'll let us stay here.
Regarding how did the western slopes work out? Because I know that the company which owns that generally allows only people to go up only on Sundays. So how did you work that out with him?
Didn't tell him, did we?
Well, when you started riding there,
So we didn't tell you we were going there?
There was some employees I think got to ride there. I remember Tommy Thompson and some people did a weekly mountain bike ride there, and then we started maintaining the trails there, and it just slowly formalized when we were getting hassled by security guards for riding there. It was like, well, we're also working on the trails. It was a slow process, and now it's a much more legitimized relationship, and access is much more formalized. But it was kind of in the early '90s when we first started doing work there.
But who made the connection?
What's that?
Who made the personal
Kenny
connection?
Hess who still works for Mass and has been working there for 30, 40 years. He was our. What's that? Oh, man! There you go. So, yeah, I mean, Kenny,
He's been working there for 70 years.
I don't know, he just always said, I started the Lifty in the 70s or something, I don't know. But no, it was a relationship that's slowly developed and very strong now, so thanks to folks like Kenny.
More questions?
I have another one then. About 95, the Tour de Trump came through Charlottesville. Was that, what was your relationship to that?
That came through here as well, and it was
Yeah, it
basically
came through
somebody
here.
organized volunteers, and
Yeah.
we were course marshals.
Yeah, they were right out on Main Street, right
Yeah.
out on,
down through Dayton.
I mean, they stopped,
Yeah.
then they went out 42, down out 42,